Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to this session, breakout session, where we'll be looking at diversity in arbitration. If you live in London or in Europe or America, I think diversity is one word we've had over and over again. We're going to be hearing, is diversity for the sake of being diverse, or is it diverse because we are well equipped and credible enough to be in arbitration? We have a very diverse panel, as you can see, which is going to be led by Mili Jalega Odari, who is a partner at IKM Advocates, which is part of DLA Piper Africa in Kenya. I'm going to introduce Mili, who will then introduce her panelist. Mili is a partner in the firm's dispute resolution practice group. She advises clients in litigation and arbitration in various sectors, and she has experience in banking and financial services, procurement, construction tax, licensing, and regulatory issues. She also advises clients in risk assessment and management of potential disputes. Mili was part of the team that represented the Kenyan government in a multi-million-dollar investment at the International Arbitration Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes. She has successfully prosecuted and defended various cases before the courts and arbitral tribunals, and has earned the respect of clients and admiration of her peers. Mili, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and welcome everyone to this session. We have a very interesting topic today that's very close to my heart, and that is diversity in arbitration. And we all know that arbitration, international arbitration, has been described as being dominated by pale, stale male decision makers. And there's a conspicuous imbalance in age, race, and gender, which is evident at the national, regional, and global arbitral tribunals. And for today, we are going to discuss why is diversity a big deal. And to take us through this topic, we have two panelists. Our first speaker is Ms. Amani Khalifa. Amani is a counsel at Freshfields Brackhurst Derringer LLP in the UAE. She's an arbitration specialist. She has handled several large and complex disputes in the construction industry involving major real estate developments. She has been recognized by Legal 500 as thorough, impressive, and a superb lawyer who digs deep and never disappoints. Legal 500 has also highlighted her exceptional ability to translate procedural and cultural issues. She has also been recognized by Who's Legal and is an arbitrator on the Basketball Arbitral Tribunal, as well as an arbitrator in various infrastructure disputes. And so to start us off, I welcome Amani.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Mili. Thank you very much. Do you want to introduce Emilia, or would you like me to start making my remarks?
I think you can start, and then we'll introduce Emilia once you're done.
Okay. Very good. So I'm here really in my capacity. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. But the reason why I'm here is because I'm very proud to be the co-chair of the Equal Representation in Arbitration Pledges Africa Subcommittee, alongside Doyen, who will be known to many of you. Actually, Emilia is a member of the subcommittee, and along with I think 19 of us in total, from representing 15 different African jurisdictions. For those of you that don't know, I'm just going to say a few words with Mili's permission about the pledge, the background of the pledge, how it started, the objectives of the pledge, and what the pledge means in terms of taking action for the signatories of the pledge. I'll say a few words to close about the organization of the pledge itself, and then invite you all to sign it and tell you how you can do that. So starting with the background, the pledge was drawn up in 2015, and it's fair to say that there was a broad and diverse group of stakeholders involved in its drafting. That included arbitral institutions, practitioners, academics, as well as clients and the users of arbitration. And I think what motivated all of them is a common understanding that historically women have been underrepresented in international arbitration, and particularly those sitting as arbitrators. So that was really the background of the pledge. So moving on to what the pledge is trying to do. So it has really two objectives. The first objective is that it aims to improve the profile of women in arbitration and their representation. So really trying to give women a broader platform. Second, it seeks the appointment of women as arbitrators on an equal opportunity basis. And I think inherent in those objectives is a recognition that while there are many well-qualified women arbitrator candidates, they often lack the visibility that they need to get more appointments. And in fact, arbitrators do tend to be appointed from a relatively small pool of mostly male arbitrators. Now, I know, or I suspect Emilia is going to talk about different forms of diversity, and all of those forms of diversity are very, very important. And the reason they're important is because I think a lack of diversity impacts the legitimacy of the whole arbitral process from the perspective of the parties. So that legitimacy has been challenged in the past based on a lack of diversity. And I think inherent in that objection or that challenge is that if you have a lack of diversity in the pool of arbitrators, that could lead to issues regarding unconscious bias. It can also lead to conflicts of interest, especially in jurisdictions like my own home jurisdiction in Egypt, where it's a relatively specialist arbitration bar, and actually until the last 10 years or so, there weren't very many people that had the requisite expertise. And what you see when you have a very small pool of arbitrators is you can encounter procedural inefficiencies, including very long delays in rendering awards or difficulties in scheduling hearings. You might hear from sort of more in demand and more experienced arbitrators that they don't want to have a hearing in August, whereas somebody that has a lighter caseload, fewer appointments, maybe younger, and a more diverse tribunal, that possibly fewer appointments in total between all the panels, and so hopefully better availability. And I think there's really no good reason to have a narrow pool of arbitrators when there are so many well-qualified women and young practitioners and African practitioners that are not really represented sufficiently in the pool of arbitrators. So that's the objectives of the pledge. In terms of what it means day to day in practice for somebody that signed the pledge, I think we have, the last time I checked, just over 4,200 signatories. And what that is those are people who have committed to taking steps that are available to them to implement the pledge's objectives and to encourage other people to do the same. So examples of these steps include ensuring that committees, governing bodies, conference panels in the field of arbitration include a fair representation of women, and that lists of potential arbitrators or tribunal chairs provided to or considered by parties includes a fair representation of female candidates. So as lawyers, we have an obligation to ensure that the arbitrators we're proposing to our clients are diverse. So before I close, I'll just say a very brief word about the organizational structure of the pledge. It's truly global. So we have a global steering committee that includes institutions and practitioners from all over the world. We also have regional subcommittees for Africa, Latin America, and India. We have a corporate subcommittee that represents the users of arbitration, as well as a young practitioners subcommittee. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to encourage you all to sign the pledge. You can sign it online at www.arbitrationpledge.com. And I've actually included a link in the chat box to that. Thank you, Millie.
Thank you very much, Amani, for that interesting discourse. I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions for you at the end of the session. Now, let me just introduce our second panelist. And our second panelist is Dr. Emilia Onyema. Dr. Emilia is a senior lecturer in the Law Department of Swords University in London. She's a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. Dr. Onyema teaches international trade law and international commercial arbitration. She was formerly a research fellow at the School of International Arbitration, Queen Mary University in London. She's qualified to practice law in Nigeria. She's a solicitor in England and Wales, and is the alternate tribunal secretary of the Commonwealth Secretarial Arbitral Tribunal in London. She holds a PhD in international commercial arbitration with research interests in sales law, and is widely published in these areas. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Emilia Onyema.
Millie, thank you so very much. And thanks to the organizers for the invitation. Yesterday, I said that I've been waiting to be invited to come and speak. So finally, the COVID, this is my lucky year. And so I'm very grateful to the organizers for the invitation. I'm not going to rehash some of the things that Amani has already said. I'm going to set out why we think that we should have something that is bespoke for Africans and the work, and speak a little bit on the work that we do. Yesterday at the careers event where I spoke, I talked about the fact that there's several pathways in arbitration. It's not, within the community, as we were told yesterday, you have experts, and you have arbitrators, we have tribunal secretaries, we have centers, we have all sorts, we have counsel. But this panel, and I think from what Amani had said already, the discussion will focus on the lack of diversity within the pool of qualified arbitrators. So I think it's always important to note that we're not saying, this is not a question of appoint us just for the sake of appointing us. So you can just check off that, yes, we had 10 women last year. This year we've added one more. And so we're doing great. Or we had 10 Africans last year, and this year we had 11. That's absolutely not what we're saying. What we're saying goes back to one of the points that Amani already raised, and that is the idea of equal opportunity. That's actually what we're saying. What we're saying is that there is such a wide pool of qualified people, individuals that can actually be appointed, and why then do a great disservice to your clients by concentrating on this limited small pool? There is loads that is being written on diversity, and as Agnes started out with her introduction about the US and Europe and all of that, so there's a lot on diversity in different sectors. So we're not going to go into all of that. I have very limited time. I just want to concentrate a little bit on the African Promise and the work that we are doing. What are we doing to help increase the visibility, as Amani has already mentioned, and to ensure that when that opportunity comes, which is what the pledge does for us and the African Promise also does for Africans, that what we're pledging and what we're promising is that when we do have an opportunity, and we have qualified Africans or women or young people, that we will opt to go with the young person or the African or the female. And at least we know that things like conflicts and availability hopefully will be greatly reduced. And then you bring in new minds, new ideas, new thoughts into the process. And we're saying that it can only be an improvement. It would be good for the community and for the system. So one of the reasons that I heard at conferences, and remember that I'm Nigerian, so we do have quite a number of centers, and we have loads of arbitrations happening, and we have lots of people that have been involved in arbitration for a very long time. So I used to practice law in Nigeria. And my first arbitration was as counsel in a construction dispute. I was actually trained by Mururu, the Kenyan. So I owe a lot to my Kenyan colleagues. in arbitration. And so what we have is at conferences we would hear, oh, there is no expertise. And even at this conference, I've also heard there is no expertise, or we lack expertise, which to a certain degree might be true, but not across the continent. And so I asked myself, I do research, let's find out, do we actually have expertise or we do not? And that's what led to the surveys that we organize and we run at SOAS every 2 years. So in 2018, we looked and we said, let's understand from the Africans themselves what their views were. And what we then found is that the African arbitration practitioners, so I'm looking at some of our key findings, themselves said that they were heavily underrepresented in international arbitration, which was stating the obvious. Most of them have loads of experience in domestic arbitration. And then we also found that appointment of Africans is not evenly spread, because we had some Africans who were very active in the international commercial arbitration space. We then found, as relevant to our talk this afternoon, that we had significant number of respondents who were trained in arbitration. And then we asked the top 3 reasons for Africa's the underrepresentation of Africans in international arbitration. And by the Africans themselves, they said poor perception of African arbitration practitioners by their foreign colleagues, which is, as lacking in expertise and experience. So again, it's that word, perception. So perception is not reality, because what the survey shows is that there is lots of expertise on the continent, because again, we can begin to explore who is an African practitioner. So Amani lives she's Egyptian, but she lives in UAE, and she works for a very major international arbitration law firm. So in quotation marks, strictly speaking, is Amani's Africanness the type of African that we're referring to? I am Nigerian, but I live in the UK. I teach in the UK. I do primarily international arbitrations here. Am I the proper African that we're talking about? And so that's something that we really need to even unpack. And so the idea of Africans lacking in expertise and experience, which again the survey shows is not true, but it's a perception. That's the way people view it, which means it's something we need to tackle. We need to tackle that, because we need to challenge that and push back on that. Then the second reason was bias by appointers in favor of foreign counsel and arbitrator. And I've done a paper just looking at ICSID arbitrations to show that a lot depends on the counsel that you appoint, and it makes, it's logical, because clearly African law firms would know more, hopefully, African arbitrators that can be appointed. And then the last point they said was Africans not appointing fellow Africans, which is really very interesting. I'd say, when I'm being very cynical, I say that's part of the colonial legacy. This whole idea that it has to be foreign, and as long as it's foreign, is better than what we have locally. And we have to challenge that, because that is incorrect. And then sometimes we hear people saying, but doing domestic arbitration does not mean you have requisite expertise to do international arbitration. And I think that is absolutely incorrect, because yes, international arbitration may be a little bit more complex, but not all international commercial or international arbitration disputes are that complex. And you would have some domestic arbitrations that are very complex as well. And so the key point being that there is that expertise, and that expertise is really important, and it has to be celebrated. And so the question then becomes, well, with all that we're doing, we're still not seeing the sort of numbers we want to see. So what more can we do? And so what we did was, with the African Promise, we did not draft it from scratch because we had the ERA pledge. And so we discussed with the ERA pledge, and they gave us permission, and we adapted the ERA pledge. So if you look at the African Promise, and the link to the ERA pledge and the African Promise is on the chart, the idea of putting it on the chart is that you do need to sign up to it, and please go and sign it as we're talking now. Is that continuity. We're all headed in the same direction. We have people who started before us, ERA pledge, and so we can build on the successes of the ERA pledge, which is what the African Promise is. So I'm not different from the ERA pledge, as Amani has already mentioned. But so that is really, it's really important that we sign up to the ERA pledge, we sign up to the African Promise. And so how are we going to monitor successes? Again, we just go back to institutions and see what they are reporting. And so I have before me the 2019 ICC statistics, which they recently released, on the numbers of African parties and the numbers of African arbitrators and who is actually doing those appointments. And most African arbitrators who get appointment on the international space will tell you they're being appointed by the centers. And we need to rethink that and ask ourselves, why are we not appointing our fellow Africans? So my favorite example, and Millie, I'm going to stop with this example, is if there's a dispute between a Nigerian and Amani and daughters of Egypt, why can't we appoint Millie from Kenya or appoint Leyu from Ethiopia to resolve that dispute? There's absolutely no reason. So we need to rethink the way we are doing business and ensure that we do think carefully about that. There's something I want to quickly draw attention to with the ICC statistics. And if you read the ICC statistics, the ICC refers back to the number of Indian arbitrators that are currently being appointed and the increase of those. And the ICC says that because of the significant increase of Indian parties, so from 47 parties in 2018 to 147 in 2019, the number of Indian arbitrators increased from 16 arbitrators in 2018 to 34 arbitrators in 2019. Charity begins at home. We need to rethink our business model, and we do need to appoint more African arbitrators. I will stop there, and I'll be happy to take questions. Millie.
Thank you very much, Dr. Emilia. Before I open up the floor to the rest of the panel, I just have a few questions for you. You talked a lot about the African Promise, and one of the questions I would want to pose to you is, why do you think the African Promise was necessary, and how do you monitor the success of the African Promise?
Okay, so again, we felt that the African Promise was necessary because we felt that we needed to something that was focused on Africans, both men and female. And so if you look, for example, at investment arbitration, where we have reliable statistics that we can pull from, even though you look at there's been a noticeable and appreciable increase in the numbers of female arbitrations that go to female arbitrators. If you dig a little bit deeper, so this whole idea of the multiplicity of diversity factors, if you dig a little deeper and you move on to the intersectionality of diversity, the vast majority go to two white female arbitrators who are not spring chickens themselves. So you look at it, and then where are all the other women? There can't only be two women. in the whole world of arbitration. And what we've and I have to give a shout out to ICSID, because ICSID is led in this area along with a number of other institutions like the ICC that actively, when they are the ones, when it's the institution making the appointment, they actively seek out, those who are not the typical traditional faces. And that way they've given the opportunity to quite a number of Africans, quite a number of females, quite a number of younger practitioners to at least get their very first appointment for investment arbitration or commercial arbitration. And that, I think, is commendable. And so for me, the question then becomes, where are the African centers in all of this work that is going on? And that's one of the reasons why we did our survey for 2020. We just focused on African centers and to sort of know who is doing what and the quality of work that is ongoing within African centers. But as you can imagine, we need data. The centers have to provide relevant data to enable us determine and see what it is they're doing and what progress they are making. As it relates to the few centers that we have information on, it looks like we're moving in the right direction. It's a two-way traffic, which means things like participating in conferences like this, writing and all of that. We shared a lot of ways that people can sort of publicize what they do and their availability yesterday. It's equally important so that we can answer to that question, who should we be appointing? I know that Leyu is on this call, and she's doing some work around pulling together names of top African arbitrators. And so if you have no clue who to appoint, send Leyu an email and give her an idea of what it is you're looking for. In the US, Catherine Simpson and her colleagues are doing some seriously good work, because we may talk about the global North and say, oh, the arbitrators are North Americans, but even the African Americans are not getting as many arbitrations as even some of the Africans. And so that is actually quite important there as well. And of course, we have the Arbitration Foundation of African Arbitration Foundation, who is also doing some seriously good work. Association, not foundation. AFA. It's crazy when you get used to the acronym and then you forget what it stands for. Okay. Anyway, sorry, Millie. Yeah, that's me.
That's fine. Thank you very much. Emilia, Amani, we just have a few questions for you. And the first question, you talked about the ARA pledge, and the pledge doesn't set any sort of quota or target in terms of the numbers of women in arbitration. And so the question I have for you is, what was the thought process behind that? And second,
go ahead.
Sorry. So Kelly, you mentioned that the pledge currently has over 4,000 signatories. And what has the pledge achieved with the help of these signatories?
Okay, thank you very much for those two questions. So taking your first question first, I mean, why don't you have a quota? I think it's a really interesting one. I think, I know it was something that was very much debated at the time when the pledge was being drawn up. Should you have a quota system? And I think having discussed it at length, the founders of the pledge wanted a more flexible standard that would sort of find agreement with, or that would reflect the opinions of the largest number of stakeholders and be acceptable to them, in order to really create some momentum behind the pledge. So we didn't want to alienate people. And I think setting a standard of fair representation is a good standard. It's a flexible standard, and what it does is it allows the definition of fair to evolve with time. So what fair representation is against the backdrop of no women being appointed might be different to what fair representation is today and what we understand by that, because we've made progress. And I think that standard allows us to take it context by context, and to continue to make improvements, and to build on the momentum. And also it makes it more adaptable. So, different jurisdictions are in different places in their sort of development in terms of equality and gender equality overall. So I think, it's a pragmatic recognition of the fact that sometimes you need to take baby steps to make progress. And I think Emilia's points are really interesting, because I think some of the issues you raised touch upon the problem of making real progress in this area, which is that it's usually a vicious cycle. So you need to unpack one thing before you can really make headway in another. So to give an example, you touched upon arbitration requiring a degree of specialism, a degree of experience, a degree of expertise. And so when you fail to appoint qualified arbitration practitioners as counsel or as arbitrator, then you don't get the requisite experience. And when you're interviewed for a big case about how many cases you've done, you don't have as many. So I think that, pragmatically speaking, you're right. We need to start by examining our own unconscious biases, by examining our own conduct and behaviors, the recommendations that we make to clients, to try and start to unpack that vicious cycle. And by appointing arbitrators who are qualified, and the same goes for age and young practitioners. A smaller case with somebody that's had a lot of counsel experience, does it really matter if it's their first appointment? I mean, everyone has to have their first appointment at some point. So just thinking broadly about what's in your client's best interest, really, and the totality of the situation, not just hiding behind a big name, then we can start to make all kinds of progress on the various different areas of diversity. And by the way, the pledge recognizes that all forms of diversity are important, not just gender diversity. And it's really comforting to hear that, the progress that we made is a gateway towards other progress. And as the co-chair of the African subcommittee, I do believe that we can create a virtuous cycle by increasing gender diversity, because you don't have to have somebody that looks exactly like you on a tribunal to be inspired. But if everybody all looks the same, it's not very inspiring. So I think that applies with younger practitioners that are now starting to practice and looking to the tribunals that they have in their cases to really try and envisage their own futures. The second question is what have we achieved? And I'm very proud to say that it's not my achievement, but I'm very proud to represent the pledge, which has achieved a lot. And it's really rapidly evolved from just an idea or a proposal to an award-winning global campaign with truly global reach. And what it did is, I think it put gender equality very firmly on the agenda for the international arbitration community. We've had many, many sessions on diversity, and it opened a wider debate, I think, on diversity in the profession as a whole. I think the fact that you've got statistics now published by arbitral institutions, I don't want to say attribute that necessarily to the pledge, but I hope it had something to do with that now arbitral institutions regularly publish statistics on where the appointed arbitrators are from, and female to male statistics as well. And I think also, as Emilia said, I agree that institutions are taking active steps to appoint more women. And again, it's a virtuous cycle, because they're publishing them more aware of the fact that if they don't make diverse appointments, that is going to be something that's known and scrutinized and studied by people doing research. And I think perhaps the final and for me the most important and most powerful achievement is really a change in attitudes. And I think this is what where everything else flows from, because I think now if you attend an arbitration conference and it's just one all-male panel after another, there's going to be a sense amongst the audience that something isn't quite right. And that, when I started practicing, was completely normal in my region. So I joined Freshfields in Dubai a year ago, but my practice prior to that was in Egypt. And I have to say, you can count the female practitioners of arbitration on one hand. And I think they've had their fair share of challenges, both in terms of building a practice, but also in terms of getting appointments. So we have come a long way, and I think there's more to be done still.
Thank you so much, Amani. Let's just have a look at the chat box. And I can see a question from Faith Macharia to Dr. Emilia. And she says, how can we deal with the perception against African arbitrators? I don't know if you got that.
Yes, I did. And one of the things, there's so many things we can do. So we've already talked about we need to appoint ourselves in the sense of giving ourselves that opportunity. Every appointment is an opportunity. Every appointment is an opportunity for you to do excellent work. But no, regardless of how excellent I am, if I don't get the opportunity to sit as an arbitrator, it's a waste. And so it's really important. It's important that we independently figure out and find out who the newcomers are that we can support, we can encourage, we can send their names through, we can list them for possible appointments. One of the things I had been pushing for is that it might be useful to also have just bare numbers of how many Africans were nominated on the list sent to parties. And then let's just know whether more Africans are being nominated. So if you think about it, if LCIA says that we nominated 50 Africans last year for appointment, for now, let's leave how many were actually appointed. What the LCIA is saying to the international arbitration community is, we know 50 African arbitrators that you can actually appoint. That's how powerful that statement is. And so if anybody says, I don't know anybody to appoint, ring up the LCIA and you say to them, you said you nominated 50 African arbitrators. I'm looking for an African arbitrator to appoint for XYZ dispute. Can you give me a short list of 3 names? They will be able to give you that sort of short list. And that, I think, is really, really important. And the other thing for me is at conferences, because remember that a lot is said at conferences, or maybe we should be talking about virtual conferences and webinars where people make all sorts of claims. If you've had a good experience, especially if you are not an African, so it's just like with the experience of Millie and her colleagues in defending the Kenyan state in those investment arbitrations. I mean, it's mind-blowing. It is a statement on its own. And so if you've had a good experience, you've gone to an African country, you've conducted an arbitration as counsel, co-counsel, whatever, and it went well, or you participated or you appeared in any of the African centers, then say it. You're sitting in a conference and people are saying that, oh, everything there's no power, there is no this, and people are just complaining. And then you can raise your hand and say, that wasn't my own experience. I can say that, but I'm Nigerian. Amani can say that, oh, but she's Egyptian. So what do you expect? That's what they would say. But if you are not African and you've had a good experience and you stand up at that conference and raise your hands and say and tell what good experience you had, that's a very powerful way of changing the narrative. So I think I'm going to stop with those 2 examples.
Thank you very much for that. Amani, just a question for you. What, in your view, is the greatest hindrance to disappointment? Is it the parties? Is it the lawyers? Is it the institutions? What has been your experience?
I think the biggest culprit, to be frank, is unconscious biases. And I think they're all the more difficult to combat because they're unconscious and people don't realize or appreciate how they're viewing people and what assumptions that they bring about those people to the table. And I think when it becomes very, very difficult to tackle, and that's why it's so important to talk about it, because people need to start questioning their own behavior, questioning their own recommendations. So I think it only takes the blink of an eye between someone asking you, who do you recommend, and then a name popping out. But in that microsecond, there's a feedback loop in your brain going to all the usual candidates and the usual suspects, and what's required is for you to stop and think, okay, is that diverse? Am I considering diversity in your appointments? And it requires law firms to put in place processes where you consciously think about the names that you're recommending to the client, and you're talking about diversity as one of the many things that you look at when appointing an arbitrator candidate. Those of us who are involved in committees and organizing conferences, we need to take a second look at a program before it's finalized and say, is it gender balanced? Is it gender diverse? Is it geographically diverse? Is it age diverse? Because we're all guilty of it to varying extents. And I think that's why it takes time to change, because a lot has changed even since I started practicing. And I think sometimes it's hard for people to keep up. The longer that you've practiced a certain way, the harder it is to change a habit. So I think great progress has been made. And I think that's no small feat, given how difficult it is to start getting at some of these assumptions and unstated assumptions and unconscious biases.
Thank you very much.
And say that I really want to support what Amani said about the progress that is being made, because except for people who have been around for a few decades, it might be a little bit more difficult to understand when we say that a lot of progress has been made. For me, just the idea that it's almost impossible to have a conference these days without having a panel that would say something on diversity. It's important. It's a huge milestone, because it keeps that discourse in people's minds. And the more we bombard people with it, when in their practice, hopefully it will get through, they will actually think about it. So just to recognize that, yes, we've made some very good progress. But it's like having a microwave, and then before we had the microwave. So maybe we are in too much of a hurry. We think that we can make better progress, we can make faster progress at this time.
Thank you very much for that. I noticed that we're about to run out of time, but the last question to you, Dr. Emilia, is from the chat box. Did you say that most of the arbitrators are appointed by institutions or parties based on your research?
By parties. That is well. So I'm so sorry. By centers. That is absolutely well known. And you look at the statistics from any of the major centers that puts their statistics out in the public domain, and it is clear that it is when the centers themselves make the appointments that they actually consider seriously questions of diversity. And I mentioned ICSID, ICC, and even the LCIA has made good progress in that. So where we do have a lot more work to do, and Amani is already referred to that, is with the parties. And for me, when we say the parties, we mean the parties and their advisors and counsel that work with them. That's where we do have a major gap.
Thank you very much. Thank you both panelists for that riveting and interesting discussion. I believe what comes out from our discussion today is that we all have a significant role to play in improving diversity, and both in terms of gender and nationality as well. I want to thank you both for your time, and I also want to thank the organizers of the event for giving us this platform to have this discussion. And I wish you all viewers a good evening, and thank you for joining the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
for your kind invitation. Thank you very much.
It was great. Thank you very much, Millie, for taking this through. Thank you, Dr. Onyema. Thank you, Amani. This has been really, really interesting. Thank you so much for your time. I'm sure our participants will agree with me. We've all learned a thing or two. I think going forward, and I asked at the beginning of the session, is we need to be able to be qualified and credible enough so that we don't feel that we are appointed or given these opportunities just because of our genders or because we are Africans. I think we have proven that we are capable. We can compete at the same, in my view, at the same level with everybody else. But also, I think something interesting, which was highlighted in the morning and also in this conversation, is the importance of us Africans really profiling our fellow Africans, and also the part of governments to ensure that they are appointing African, and they ensure that there is diversity. And again, not just because of diversity, but because we are capable and we are qualified enough. I thank you very, very much, and for taking your time. And Dr. Amelia, 2 days in a row, thank you very much. We owe you gratitude, and we do hope that when this is all over, we can all meet somewhere beautiful in Zanzibar, if not Sudan. I thank you. Thank you, Millie. Thank you, Mani. Bye-bye now. Thank you.
Thank you.